So I would say this, especially during COVID, there was a lot of emphasis on mindfulness.
Mhm.
And I know people have different definitions of what mindfulness means, but to me, it was essentially, be able to listen to someone without having, an automatic response or some sort of, active listening when you're hearing some person and, it's actually registering without eliciting any sort of an emotion, which is very hard to do. I mean, we're all
Mhm.
humans and we all have, we're not robots.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Impact and Influence. This is a communication podcast where I get to interview incredible leaders in corporate organizations, HR professionals, to talk about communication and how to create effective communication amongst their team and between leadership and their staff. Today, I have an old colleague of mine, Gursaran Singh. He is the current VP of Energy Alliance with Volta Energy. And I am so excited to chat with him again because we worked together years ago on a project and I really enjoyed working with him. And I think he'll bring some really great insights into our conversation today. So welcome, Gursaran. Nice to see you.
Good afternoon, Nancy. Thanks for having me. It's great to see you again as well.
Yeah, so you just recently stepped up into a new role in your VP position. And one of the things that we see in the world is people doing a lot of transitions and change. So tell me, what is it like to step into a VP role in a new company? And what's it been like so far?
In many ways, it's the same. We know your day-to-day tasks. Perhaps they have a different. It's more strategic now than tactical because the
Mhm.
position I came from, I was actually the manager of the engineering department at a company before. Because I had a big team, there is lots of day-to-day activities there that are more, like a human resource management per se.
Yeah.
In a position that I'm in now, there is a lot of strategic role,
Mhm.
so sometimes it is not as objective, let's put it this way. You know what I'm saying? Because you have
Yeah.
to look between the lines and you have to be able to project when you have a blob of information what we are trying to get out of it and how we have to get it done, as opposed to something like a manager, where the duties are pretty much laid out. It's more a matter of execution. Here, you actually have to think about what the end goal is, what the resources at hand are, and how we're going to get to the end point.
Yeah, right. And how to utilize your resources to move forward. So, as you have now stepped into this role and you're starting to connect with people, what is one of the things that you enjoy most about connecting as a leader with others in your team?
I just came back for a conference, and it's funny that you asked me that. I met a gentleman, Emmanuel, who essentially has recently just been promoted to vice president as well. And, it's almost like rookies find rookies. You could see both of us kind of had that instant. I don't know if the word is attraction, but you saw that link, that synergy, that approached, just the excitement that is there. Your interactions, again, the position that you're coming from is perhaps a little bit different, but the overall mechanics of how you deal with people,
Hmm.
there's not much different there. I
Yeah.
am somebody who has learned. I like to think I'm proficient with, at interacting, at making contacts with people. So the mechanics of that does not change. It's just
Right.
again going back when you come from a more senior position. It's more strategic. Sometimes you're making contacts with people that may not bear fruit
Hmm.
instantaneously. It's a
Yes.
matter of 6 months down the road, things will click and say, okay, that's where this thing has fixed. So when you are at a position like a VP, the strategic part of it you have to keep in mind.
So as you're out networking more, right? One of the things, as you talked about, right, it's more strategic. as you move up the corporation, right, you're more looking, there's a lot of looking outside the company in a networking perspective. And I don't know that people really understand that super well, especially if they're a junior employee and moving up. But the ability to get good at networking, to be able to reach out and connect, right, with even people that you've known historically or with new people, is one of the key things of moving into that leadership role, right? It's not just managing down, but it's now managing out. What is one strategy that you are developing or working on, developing in your networking abilities?
So again, one of the things, the field that I've come into is away from my core competency. I'm a chemical engineer. Volta's primary business right now is on the electrical side.
Right.
So one thing that I've had to do is do a crash course on the electrical side. I understand the concepts and I'm well aware of the capabilities, but that does not translate into being a good salesperson of how this fits. So one of the strategies that I have to use is to be able to relate, because we are trying to penetrate the oil and gas market right now. It's relate, especially in Sarnia, where you get to see some of the infrastructure is not, how to put this, it's not new. Many of the things are grandfathered in.
It's very old, right?
Right. So as you try to modernize, and we are operating in this paradigm like, you need to go green, right? Again, budgets are always constrained. So how can you take that experience that you've had being in the field and have seen everything, and now bring this new technological innovation and link them together?
Right.
If that makes sense, it's the synergy that what I'm trying to sell to an area where I've worked my entire career, right? So how to make those things jive. So, we have had recent meetings, I won't name any names, with some big companies in Sarnia. And I'm learning, like, first time I think it was too technical. Second time, perhaps it was a little bit more tangential. So I think the last one really nailed it, because now we were able to lay down the case.
Right.
This is where we're coming from. We know what your requirements are, and that's based on 15 years of working in facilities like yours. And this is how we fit it. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I didn't have a grand strategy, but that's more at a tactical level what we're.
And that's interesting, right? Because you and I both have backgrounds in chemical engineering, right? Interestingly enough, I ended my engineering career in the electrical and instrumentation controls area, right? Teaching, doing that. And when you do that, right, you have to trust your base knowledge of what the client needs, not necessarily your technical skill set of what the program is that you're doing. And so I find that really interesting, the parallels between how I ended my engineering career and where you currently are in this VP role and going out and communicating. And you're right, like the oil and gas industry, especially in most of North America, the facilities are very old. The last project that you and I worked on, right, that facility was like started in the end of the 1800s.
1889. Right. Yeah, correct.
Right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of old technology, and so bringing in new ways of doing things, new things, it's like, how do I sell this case? How do I communicate it? Also knowing that they're very technical people, typically engineers in the oil and gas industry.
Right.
But it's also connecting to what is the win for them.
So Nancy, one of the things you will notice is when we get the initial contacts and calls, it's usually people who are higher up. Again, at a more strategic level. So you cannot get too technical with them. Right. But at the same time, if you get a contact that's technical, they don't care about, I shouldn't say they don't care about, but they perhaps are not concerned with the macro level. They are more concerned with tactical day-to-day things. You know what I'm saying? So it's a completely different pitch at somebody who is your first contact and somebody who's technical. So that distinction also becomes very important.
Very true, right? And so learning how to adjust somewhat on the fly, depending on who's in front of you, right? And paying attention to what is it their needs are versus the other people. And yeah, as lower down, as engineers, I don't mean lower down, but as engineers kind of more in the base day-to-day operation level, right? Like we were historically all about the data, the tactics, those types of things. But as senior VPs, and when you're pitching things from VP to VP, then it's at more a strategic level. What is the big term win and gain? Mm-hmm. And I also find, and I'm curious to know if you do this, as I'm working with coaching people into that VP role, is to get more clear and simplified in what it is, right? Get to the point quickly without a lot of details. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, so that's like your elevator pitch, right?
Right.
But again, the engineer in you sometimes, see, I have been sometimes, I shouldn't stereotype, I guess would be the best word to use. I shouldn't say accused. Sometimes I get too detail oriented because I have always, I believe that information that's communicated to you is usually layered, and you may see the top part is essentially interface that you're supposed to grab onto. But if you actually need useful information, you have to dig deeper and go one level, second level, third level. So when I put myself and I'm being pitched something, it's okay to get the punchlines to grab interest, but my attention seeker then is, okay, let's get to the substance part. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
So I have to learn to disengage myself in terms of how I upload information, or analyze information to who somebody on the other side to whom I'm providing information is capable of reviewing. Perhaps, they are much smarter than me and they can decipher just from the top level information if it's something of use or not.
Right.
Just going back to your, keeping it simple part. That's always, even within our groups, we have people who are technical, like my boss who's in the next room, and he's a viz genius, right? So to him, information, he's going down to first principles. You know what I'm saying? So I'll give you an example. If you're talking about electrical signature analyses, he's going to go down to the nitty gritty. Then that's not something you can present, let's say, in a sales presentation, because people are like, what is this? This is not a PhD class. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we have to find that happy medium showing like, this is something new, novel, and useful, but we don't expect you to know, which is why we have the PhDs here doing the work.
Right.
It is always, Nancy, depending upon who you're talking to, it's always a struggle to find the sweet spot.
Yeah, to find those sweet spots. So one of the things I don't know how much you've been following me, but I start to teach a process known as the process communication model. And one of the things that I learned about PCM, especially about myself, is, and it's probably the reason I became an engineer as well, is that one of my drivers in communication is what we call the be perfect driver. And people with this be perfect driver have a tendency to over communicate, will provide far more detail than necessary because, we want to make sure that you get all the perfect information out there. And what I discovered is 25% of the population, have this be perfect driver in them. And so it's a natural habit that happens when we're children, is to do that. So I have that within me. I think a lot of engineers, as you talked about, can get into those details, but it's only 25%. And so I'm working with another client who talks about their bosses, and their bosses have what we call promoter. And so the promoter driver is be strong, but they like things in really quick, short action, like let's get into action. And so it's kind of interesting as I look at these different communication styles, I'm learning how to get clearer and more specific on what it is. Or even with people, which is my biggest struggle, with emotions, who see the world through emotion instead, and they're a softer, gentler conversation. It's about how do I adjust my communication style to adapt to them. And so learning to be able to read the other person, Like how much detail? Where do we want to go with this? Mm-hmm.
100%. And just your last part, this is why this modern paradigm we've had since COVID of everything being on Zoom, it has
Yes.
made things even more complicated. I don't know if you have noticed this or not. It's harder to read people, when you are in a forum like
Yes.
Zoom or,
Yes.
Teams or whatever we use today. A person to person meeting gives you a much, your interaction is more
Mm-hmm.
meaningful in the sense that you can gauge personalities, you can gauge body
Yeah.
language, you can gauge interest levels, you can see. If I am speaking to a room of 15 people on Zoom, it's not the same thing as if I'm speaking to a room of 15 people who are all physically present there, because you take
Yeah.
your cues from body language. It's hard to do that in something like Zoom. You know what I'm trying to say?
It is.
Which is why it's an interesting, I think, communication styles. The meetings I've had over the past 2 years, and we had big teams. You almost have to be like it's like a classroom. You have to address individual people and say, am I getting through? You have questions. I encourage you to speak and stuff. Because unlike a room where you're physically present and you can take your cues, you can't do this. Imagine we have 15 different screens. You can't look at 15 different people to
Exactly.
see.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets to be harder. I agree. Because you can't just like at the side of your eye notice somebody else's facial or body language change, right? Based on some comment or see them have like an aha moment and that you want to then engage
Right.
them in. The
Right.
other thing I find challenging on Zoom is that a lot of people aren't comfortable on camera. So oftentimes the cameras are off and we lose that ability to pay attention to the gestures, the body language, the facial expressions, these different micro things that are going on, and just see, are they even engaged with what
Correct.
we're doing? Mm,
Right. And see,
yeah.
I'm a kind of person, I believe, Nancy, so are you. When you communicate with somebody, it's not like you're disseminating knowledge and people get it, they get it, they don't,
Mm-hmm.
they don't. I actually need to see if I'm getting through, and I would
Yeah.
like to modify my delivery technique based on, okay, maybe perhaps I'm going too fast or I'm going too slow or if I have gone on a tangent. It's
Mm-hmm.
very important. This is an interactive,
Yeah.
we're not lecturers who are just disseminating information, as a
Right.
monologue. It has to be an interactive
Yeah.
part.
Especially in the area of sales, right? When you're out there trying to sell and trying to build new clientele and those types of things, you want to see the response. You want to be able to see their body language in that. It's like, I remember years ago when I would go out and do sales pitches or present proposals for some of the big projects for the company that you and I worked for. You would pay attention to the energy in the room, right? And you can't feel that energy really well on Zoom or LinkedIn. It's a lot of work. Like those people who do that, right? It's a lot of work for them to build that energy on something like this, but on in a room, in a physical room, when you get to sit side by side. Like I remember when you and I worked together, right? Our office spaces weren't very far apart. They were, but you could always hear, there was always on our floor like this little bit of laughter and this little bit of joy. And those bits get missed when we end up all at home and be able to be like, hey, what's funny, right? What's that connection? And
100%.
build those relationships. I love being with people in a room. Even though I would have to say I'm more introverted, I still really enjoy those connections, those connecting to people and getting to know people.
I will
Hmm.
ditto that, Nancy. 100% the same. I wouldn't consider myself as an introvert. I mean, depends. You need to get comfortable with people, but
Yeah.
if you work in a silo, this is something. Especially the younger you are, you need to have that exposure to different
Hmm.
people, different kinds, and especially if you're ambitious and you want, to do well in any chosen field that you have.
Right.
Yeah, I think the metaverse perhaps is a tiny bit too early. We still need to be able to physically interact with each other,
Hmm.
in the same space. So 100% agree.
Yeah, yeah, and be able to network. So you indicated you were just before we jumped on, you were at a networking event, and so what was that like for you to be back out in public in a networking? Was it in Toronto or was it like
I was out
outside
in
of?
Vancouver.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one thing is, I have not attended a conference since my school days. I think 2004 was the last. Actually, well, I have been to expos, but not to a
Right.
conference because this was a conference slash a networking event.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it brought back some good memories. I'm surprised with how much resilience I have. I actually sat down and listened to each and every lecture, and I actually got something useful out of all of them.
Nice.
So yeah, no, I mean, sometimes you surprise yourself.
Yeah.
It comes back. It's like riding a bicycle, right? You may think,
Hmm.
you know, how are you going to make it through? But no, for two and a
Right.
half days, I was there paying attention, and I'm like, kudos to me. But yeah, apart from that, in networking, again, you meet some people who are well suited for the networking role. I mean, I was
Yes.
very impressed with this young professional out of Alberta, and after interacting with her, it's like if I was to have a sales department or if I was to
Hmm.
have somebody who was a spokesperson for my company, I would 100% say that person. I mean, technically proficient, but just the
Yeah.
warmth and the fact that when you interact, you come back with like, it was really nice meeting this person and I actually learned something. And this is just
Mm.
a positive interaction. Some
Yeah.
people have that vibe that they exude that it's a very positive outcome meeting that
Right.
kind of person. So I was very impressed with that, and hopefully I can incorporate some of those qualities, some known, some unknown qualities in my interaction with people.
Right.
So yeah, overall it was
Well,
great. Yeah,
yeah. Awesome. My experience, Gursaran, is you're very personable, which is what I enjoyed working with you years ago. I can't believe how fast time has actually gone since we
right.
worked together on that kind of crazy project. That was probably one of the craziest projects.
It has restarted, Nancy. I don't know if you heard or not out of Edmonton.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, yeah,
They've restarted it and brought it back.
indeed.
The challenge of all challenges, right?
Yes.
Um, but you know what? If I think back to that time, I think what was interesting is we had to be really creative, right? And in that, to solve that problem that we were both working on, required creativity, right? Required people to get out of like really stuck ideas of old ways of doing even engineering, even solving a problem, right? And work on something new. And I find that energizing is when you get to work on something new, you get to be creative. And so as you work with Volta, right, and we chatted earlier, I have a feeling that LinkedIn says it's failed to connect. So that's all right. I'll resolve and work with this afterwards. But when we were doing that type of work and we were increasing creativity, and you are now with a company that's trying to bring a new idea into the oil and gas industry, how within Volta do you communicate about increasing that energy and creativity to sell and market what it is that you're doing?
So I will tell you, it's a little bit hard because
Mhm.
Volta right now as a company is a little bit scattered. Most of our
Okay.
technical talent actually is in the United States,
Hmm.
and within states, they're in California, they're in North Carolina. We have people in Nova Scotia, and then it's a small group here in Toronto.
Hmm.
Also, I don't know if people from California have some very strong preferences I'm not going to go into brand names and stuff. I mean, some of the hardest things is to get all the people on the same platform, because
Right.
somebody wants to use brand A, somebody wants to use brand B, and sometimes
Hmm.
it's 10 minutes of like, okay, be it A or B, let's just all use the same thing, because otherwise it
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Yes.
Um, so it is a challenge, I have to
Hmm.
admit. But
Yeah.
what we are trying to do is see, because Volta was a startup for the longest time, and only recently we have had a lot of success in the past 2 years.
Hmm.
And the company has now established roots, and we are looking to expand.
Yeah.
So the idea here is now, as we hire, as we grow bigger, it's essentially standardization is one thing. The second thing is bringing people up to date. I mean, I just made an org chart, and I know somebody came to me and was like, well, we have a flat hierarchy here. I'm like, okay, I'm not saying that this is a feudal system, but
Right.
we at least need to know what individuals are working on, because it cannot be, like a commune where people work on what they like to. There are
Right.
still some set duties for which you're accountable for. He
Right.
goes, yes, that makes sense. I'm like, yes, so don't look at
Yeah.
an org chart strictly as, this is a ladder and this is a corporate
Right.
ladder and it's a feudal system. It's more about, we entrust our team members with certain accountabilities that they are responsible for and
Right.
they're working towards, right? So that's
Yeah.
a nascent first step. And the next step essentially is try and bring people with weekly meetings, bring them together, make everybody aware of what everybody else is working on per se, and then
Sharing.
sharing, and then basically explaining, look, this is our vision. We have established ourselves in this certain area, and because we know oil and gas field is big,
Hmm.
the potential is enormous. So this is what we're looking to penetrate. So now
Right.
people are excited because they understand, and now we are all pulling together
Yes.
different people. They come with ideas, and we have chats going, group chats and stuff. So slowly, I think we're bringing in that
Yeah.
collaborate.
Yeah. And,
Right,
when people learn to collaborate really well together, when they
right,
learn to kind of connect and see each other's strengths and play off each other, that's
right.
when you can really build ideas. I was having a conversation with an entrepreneur, and she was like, I don't understand why everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. And the challenge is, if everybody was an individual entrepreneur, right, we would actually not achieve anything. It is
Yeah,
through group, people working as a group, right? One entrepreneur can only go so far, but then if you add more people to that team, they can come up with really incredible ideas together. They can excel it. You can go farther. You can create bigger things. And so learning how to build the team in your organization and have people interacting in that way is a really positive perspective. And I agree with you. Org charts aren't about, they're about roles and responsibilities and giving key expectations in each place, but it
right.
doesn't necessarily mean that org charts should be the way of communication,
Correct.
right? Communication should be able to flow nicely up and down the org chart as well as laterally, and people getting
Agreed.
comfortable being able to interact
Right.
well with each other.
So
Hmm.
org chart is not supposed to be a silo where and you're in the silo and this is your chain of command. This is what
Hmm.
we're trying to get away. Org chart essentially is just laying out, okay, if you're working on this side of product
Hmm.
development, great. You're working with these individuals and this is where the accountabilities are. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? You
Yeah,
cannot have 20 people all working in different areas and then at the end of the day there has to be accountability, right? And that does not
exactly.
matter if you're a corporation of 20,000 people or a
Hmm.
small startup of 20 people.
Yeah.
Accountability is a key aspect of any organization's functioning, right? So
Hmm.
looking at it more as a chart to help us establish that, okay, these are the roles we have for people. Again, this is not supposed to be an impediment saying that, okay, so you cannot talk to Dennis, who's our CEO and stuff. No.
Right.
What it's doing is just laying down, okay, right now we are structured in this way and we have these many resources working on this side of the product development part, this part of sales,
Yeah.
side of things. So yeah, this is meant to be more a tool in aiding organization rather than setting
Hmm.
it up so that it can be controlled. You know what I'm
Right.
trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Right. And I feel that the old style was more about kind of a control, but as we move into the newer future, and companies that are really successful are the ones whose org chart doesn't limit them, but helps them move forward. As well, I think it's really important, and one of the things that I heard you talk about was almost trying to get alignment right around
Right.
a specific project or a specific topic. And so, what is one of the ways that you, from your leadership style, do you help support alignment in a common direction?
So the first thing is, if you have different perspectives and views, the
Mm-hmm.
worst thing you can do is make a choice before you have heard everybody.
Yeah.
Because then you can no longer actively listen, because if you already have an inherent bias towards a certain way of doing things, then you can no longer facilitate in an impartial way which direction you should go to. So the first thing is you have to hear out all the different perspectives. And again,
Right.
it may sound like cliche, you do pro cons and see which way to proceed. And then essentially you can do this in a collaborative fashion where you can try and make points,
Mm-hmm.
almost like a negotiation going in. Or at the end of the day, if sometimes issues are, let's say, I hate to use the word trivial when compared to the bigger context. So
Yeah.
you may have to step in and then essentially, almost like a dictatorial way, say, okay, for this part, we are going to go with this way forward, and we come back and reevaluate in 2 months. If it's not working, we can go in a
Mm-hmm.
different direction. On something that's more meaningful, you probably need everybody's alignment
Right.
uh, going forward, right? So that becomes more collaborative. There's different ways to facilitate decision making like
Yeah.
this, eliminating things. It's like a negotiation, right? You have to come to, if people have agreement on certain common parameters, then
Mm-hmm.
essentially you have to build up. But you
Right.
cannot have a decision and then try to justify it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
More bottoms up. If you're asking
Yeah.
me, I would say I'm more bottoms up than a tops down kind of thing.
Right.
You have to
Right.
build consensus.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. I really like how that concept is, because that then gets communication to flow up and down
Right.
as kind of a really nice ebb and flow in the way information is shared, and it engages people's buy-in into the direction and where people are going. So one of the experiences that I have seen in my career is that when people don't have a really good vision of where the end point is, they can think they're aligned and they're all running, but they end up in, it doesn't necessarily push the company
Right.
forward. So for example, I worked with a company years ago in my engineering career, and I used to describe to them, it was like they were going west, but in everybody's opinion, west was LA, west was Pennsylvania, and west was Vancouver, right? But they all were putting their heart in it and doing the right thing. But because they hadn't defined where west was, right, they ended up running in different directions, not consistently. Mm-hmm.
Correct.
So, as a startup, how do you deal with those types of challenges?
Yeah, that is tough, Nancy, because because specifically for Volta, because the company has evolved.
Mm-hmm.
From its first iteration, it has undergone many different iterations
Yeah.
until it has arrived at this point. When you have a group of very talented people,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's harder to lay down. You don't want to impede the creative aspect. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? So
Yeah.
again, I hate to use cliche words. So it's almost more like, it's like an agile approach. Okay, we are trying to do something in this general direction.
Mm-hmm.
Go back, think about it. Let's come back in a week.
Right.
Let's talk about it. Let's see what everybody has, and then perhaps you can start defining. Okay, this is the west that we are trying to go towards. So you know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? Not
Yeah.
as west as Vancouver or LA, right?
Right.
But perhaps let's look at Chicago. Maybe if you can get to Chicago from Sarnia,
Right.
which is our common town. and then we have a sound basis, and then we have different note points to look at. So that essentially is very proactive. It is interactive. It cannot be a silo where, like in graduate school, somebody may lock themselves up for a lab in 3 months and then come out with something, which is great for doing research. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? If you're looking for actual engineering, let's say, solution which can be commercialized and, which actually has a business value, you can't have that. You cannot be in a silo. So essentially, people need to have the creative outlet, but they need to interact with each other to make sure that they're not running, like you said, West is in different directions and it's far, far off.
Right.
You have to come to points, perhaps smaller milestones, you know what I'm saying? And then perhaps you can branch off or you can try connect. You can't just, you know what I'm trying to say. To get to Mars, first we had to get to the moon, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
it almost feels like doing project work, right? Where we kind of go, okay, the first step, right? Let's just figure out what it is that we're trying to solve. And we do a certain amount of effort to get there, right? And then we align even more to get the next level of effort as we do the front end. And then as we get into the detail, it's like, okay, now we're moving towards the solution and something that's operable. So it's a matter of 100%. Moving down those types of paths.
Right.
Yeah. So anything else that you think is worth sharing from a communication that you see in, if you could give, actually, I'm going to ask this question in a different way. If you could give any recommendation that has provided the greatest value to you in your learning of communication with people, what would you recommend to someone?
So I would say this, especially during COVID, there was a lot of emphasis on mindfulness. And I know people have different definitions of what mindfulness means, but to me, it was essentially, be able to listen to someone without having, an automatic response or some sort of, active listening when you're hearing some person and, it's actually registering without eliciting any sort of an emotion, which is very hard to do. We're all humans and we all have, we're not robots. To me, that's something that I've worked extremely hard at adopting, in my interactions with people, is the ability to listen to the counterpart's perspective, to the person's perspective, without having any sort of a preconceived notion, or what they call the ladder of inference, which actually makes a lot of sense. Don't assume, don't infer. Hear the person, ask questions, and never be afraid to show that you may not have understood, or you don't get the context, or making sure that, is this what you're trying to say? You save yourself a lot of trouble by clarifying things right up front, rather than being offended or, going into a negative space. And equally on the other side, don't get too enthusiastic and happy because you're hearing what you want to hear. I much rather double check, triple check, and make sure that the other person is saying actually is the same thing. Right. So that's mindfulness of active listening, and don't be afraid to show that you didn't understand. I don't think anybody would judge you if you're slow or not.
Yeah, I love that. I've never heard the concept of calling it mindfulness in communication, but I think that's a beautiful expression of really just being aware of allowing yourself to truly just listen and intake without emotional response. I think that's a really interesting and beautiful way to connect and show connection and appreciation. Gursaran, this has been so lovely to chat with you and connect with you. It's been such a long time. I'm so glad that I reached out. So for those of you who are watching, this is an example of using networking. I sent Gursaran a quick little note on LinkedIn and invited him to be part of this show. And I knew that he had this wonderful perspective of life and of leadership and communication. And so I thought I'd see if he'd be open to share it with you. And so when you reach out and connect with people, you can get amazing ideas, concepts, and information to share with the world and your team within your organization. So thank you, Gursaran, for being part. This was Communicate with Impact and Influence. If you would like to be part of this show, this live stream, then send me a quick message. I would love to host you on this channel. Cheers.
Thank you, Nancy.